I must say that I had a script prepared for the next conversation, but I'm going to keep it aside because in the run-up to this chat, we were speaking to Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal outside, and some of you might know this. He actually designed and built a ship that was seen in a picture in Ajanta that dates back to the 5th century AD. This is called a stitch ship, and it has no nails. It's been put together. It's been rigged with rope, and it was sailed by Mr. Sanyal and members of the Navy from Porbandar in Gujarat to Muscat. It is a journey that took 17.5 days. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is that what he described to me and certain others sitting outside is that just like this naval journey, oftentimes economic growth and trade negotiations are not a straight path. He was describing the fact that when they set out from Porbandar, there was no supportive wind or current. And they were blown in the wrong direction. The wind was actually a headwind. So they decided instead of going west, that they would go north. They went so far north that they were within touching distance of the border of the neighbor. And so the story is, and I'll let him tell some portions of that, they managed to get it around, and eventually the wind became supportive and they reached their destination. So headwinds exist. They will eventually turn into tailwinds. The ability to navigate that is the most important factor. From my perspective, that's what I took from this conversation. So let me, without further ado, introduce this gentleman to you, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal. You all know him. And to have a conversation with him, please, Tamanna Inandar.
That was quite some description. Thank you for that, Alex. Thank you so much, Mr. Sanyal, for joining in today. I think maneuvering through rocky waters is something that India has done very deftly in the last 12 months. And we're speaking at a time when it feels like we've come to some kind of conclusion of a sometimes painful process when it comes to the India-US trade deal. I'm going to start off right on that. Have we really come to a conclusion, or this is an interim sort of a pause?
So you have to remember that I'm not just an economist, but also a historian. There is no end to history. So, of course, it is an iterative process, but the last few years have been particularly tough. We had the COVID situation. Then we had a major disruption in the global trade system, which, by the way, predates President Trump. It was already under enormous strain and breaking down. And then we had the last 1 year of disruptions. But I think on the whole, we can say that India has managed to get some very good trade deals in the bag. Not just the latest announcements, but we had some with the Australia, UAE, the UK, the European Union, and of course now in the next few weeks, one with the US as well. But at every stage, one important thing should have come across, that we never escalate things, but we do not easily back down either. So we are clear about what we consider to be national interest, and we will be patient if necessary, but we will get more or less the deal we want, and the trade-offs we will make will be the ones we think work very much in our favor.
You know, that's interesting you say, and you put it like that, because when you talk about the art of the deal, we were in that conversation with someone, an individual who prides himself on cracking the best deal. Today, anyone looking at it is trying to figure out, did India get a good deal? Do you think we can emphatically say yes when it comes to the India-US trade deal?
Well, I think we have done a good job, but as I said, I am not the person who did the negotiation, so please don't be under impression.
No, I'm talking about what we know, so far.
Yeah, so as far as I understand it, we have a very solid deal in the pipeline, and you will be getting, I think, Minister Piyush Goyal shortly, so he would be able to give you much more detail. But my understanding is that we got what we wanted, and I think so did the US. So it should be a good deal from both sides.
Has it also come at a time when not just India and not just the United States, but world over, there is a move towards becoming more and more self-reliant? And India can very clearly say that we had this in mind. We were on this path much before everyone else. Not protectionism, but self-reliance. How do you see the way India sits right now with both these imperatives?
So I think we began to talk about self-reliance, but I want to distinguish here between the kind of sort of import substitution kind of mindset of the 1950s and 60s with what we mean by self-reliance now. Self-reliance now is much more focused on what is geostrategically important to us, or economically it's sort of a backbone. We don't try to protect everything. We also have an outward orientation towards exports, which we didn't have in the 50s and 60s. That was much more of a fearful response to a history of having been colonized, whereas we have a much more outward expansionist approach to the world. So it is fundamentally different in the approach we take towards when we say self-reliance. For example, we will be willing, if we find that it's not economical for us to do a certain activity, to sort of sign deals with countries or make arrangements that would allow us to function even if other countries are doing it for us. So, for example, hydrocarbons. India is not a hydrocarbon-rich country, even though we keep exploring and trying to find more. But in the end, we have to rely on other countries. Under those circumstances, I hope you have got a sense of the fact that we will make the sort of international, we will build those international relationships necessary to allow us to buy cheap energy for our 1.4 billion people. And if it requires us to do some tricky navigation, we will do so.
Are we set for some tricky navigation when it comes to import of Russian crude?
It is always the case that we are looking for cheap resources for the Indian economy. And we have, I think, more or less made it clear that we will continue to have this view of the world into the future. That does not mean that we will not take into account the views of our allies, but our allies also have to understand that we have our own imperatives. And I think some adjustments will be arrived at.
When you say adjustments, just trying to understand how you look at the facts we have in front of us today. You have one claim that India is going to stop importing Russian crude. And then you look at our import or our crude basket, and one doesn't understand how that's going to happen anytime soon.
As I said, our main interest as the government is to make sure that our economy gets cheap fuel. Because we are not a country that has been blessed with a huge amount of hydrocarbons. So we do need to import gas, crude, and so on. And we will buy it from the cheapest available source. But obviously, we will take into account the global sensitivity and so on. But as I said, we also expect our allies to understand our circumstances. So accommodation is made, as was made over the last few years. Irrespective of all the rhetoric, the fact of the matter is the world did adjust to the fact that we purchased Russian oil. And if cheap resources are made available to us from other sources, we will certainly explore this as well.
Are they available at this time? Is that,
as I said, this is an evolving thing. If tomorrow you ask us to begin importing Venezuelan crude, can we do it? No, because our refineries will not necessarily be able to do heavy crude from Venezuela tomorrow morning. Over a period of time, can we adjust to them? Yes. So these are circumstances that evolve, and we evolve with them. But of course, as I said, we take into account the sensitivities of other countries. And as I said, similarly, we expect them to take our sensitivities into account as well.
That is a completely reasonable expectation. But I wish to juxtapose it with what we have seen on other deals.
I can't talk about others. I think India has been reasonable all through. So we will continue to be reasonable.
Do you think that the greatest strength that India has shown is maybe in our responses or lack of responses to provocations through this period of negotiations?
So I think here is something.
It's been a masterclass in a sense.
So I think here you may want to bring some of these up with Minister Goel, because he's the person who really did this, not so much me. But as I said, and I've said before in others as well, we were clear about what it is that we wanted, and we were firm. At no point did we escalate matters, but also at the same time, at no point did we back down. And I think people respect ultimately the fact that, we were clear about what we wanted and stood by it. People understand that, we have a government that stands by national interest. It's not so difficult to understand what is our national interest. And ultimately, they are adjusting to them.
Okay. Mr. Sanyal, you are, of course, member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. You are an economist yourself. And we've just concluded a budget. We've looked at our growth forecast. We're one of the fastest growing economies in the world. With these 5 trade deals under our belt and the situation easing for exporters, do you see India perhaps now growing faster than what has been penciled in?
So I think we are expecting this year we are growing at about 7.4%. I think that's what the chief economic advisor had also stated in the economic survey. I think that's a reasonable clip.
Actually, 6.8 to 7.2 is the range, and then we're wondering
so
if it's going to be a plus.
We are now doing it about 7.4. That is our sense of what we'll do. We did better than what we had originally expected. Given that we have done this with very troubled external environment and with no stress to our own macros, I mean, inflation is running at below 2%. In fact, some people argue too low. Other indicators of the macros are also in good shape. The current account is in decent shape. The fiscal deficit is slowly coming down. We expect 4.3% for the central government of GDP, which is not bad at all. And very importantly, the financial system has been cleaned up. I mean, the banking system, which when I was at Finance Ministry as Principal Economic Advisor, one of the things we used to spend a lot of time thinking about and worrying about was the banking system. Today, the net NPA level of the banking system is down to 0.5%. Healthy by any standards around the world, well capitalized and in good shape. So we are generating this sort of growth without those stresses, suggesting to me that we can not just sustain this. If the circumstances open up, let's say because of the trade deals and other things, we may be able to sustain significantly higher growth rates into the future. Now, I'm not one of those who believes in pressing the accelerator unnecessarily hard when you don't need to, but the space is opening up. Now, obviously, I can't predict how the world will behave in the next 5 years, but if the world is growing at a reasonable clip, and at least we are able to create these spaces for our exports, then we may be able to do above 7% type growth rates on a sustained basis without stressing our macros. I keep coming back to this. Doing high growth rate while stressing your macros is not sustainable. So the game is really about doing those high growth rates without your inflation and other macroeconomic indicators blowing out. And I think we will be able to do that.
Do you think our exporters, now that they have got the fillip they need, will be able to compete better? If I look at the tariff rate in comparison to neighboring countries vis-a-vis the United States, we're well placed. But tariff rate is one part of it. There are many other reasons why India has not been firing on the export cylinder as much as others.
So first of all, remember, we are now a services export hub. Those exports have continued to do decently well. In fact, we export more services than goods now. But even on the goods side, there are many things that fall in place. First of all, if you had gone back 10 years and asked people, what is it that gets in your way from being a great exporter from India? Many of the things they've talked about, for example, infrastructure. These are no longer considered to be binding constraints. I'm not saying we can't improve our infrastructure. I'm just saying they're no longer binding constraints. Similarly, many of our companies didn't have scale then. Not true of every sector, but now we do have some seriously large companies in India in many, many areas that, and nobody can deny that. And very profitable ones as well. And coming out of COVID, the twin balance sheet problem wasn't just about the banks, it was also about the corporate balance sheets. Our corporate balance sheets can now take a, serious space for not just investment, but also doing R&D and doing other things as well.
Yet they don't invest.
Well, you may want to ask them why they don't.
Why do you think so? They say, I need to see the demand.
My own view on this is that in an economy that is growing at 7%, well, there must be surely demand. I personally think that you need probably more competition domestically, providing some level of protection to our domestic industry during the recovery from the COVID was a fair thing to do. But I think they are now mature enough and strong enough to be able to take greater amounts of competition. And so you may have seen that we have been systematically removing things like QCOs, for example, because we think our Indian industry can take that pressure and compete. And now, of course, we are opening up all these new vistas for them to compete in. Of course, remember, they will also get competition from those countries. It's not a one-way street only. But we think that our companies are now capable of taking the competition into their domestic market, but also be able to conquer new markets where they have to go. And so, obviously, that requires many other things, including, I think, an exchange rate, which is by any measure is hugely competitive right now.
Do you see the rupee stabilizing, though?
I never comment on where the rupee will go, but I will say the rupee is very competitive. And not just that, do remember our inflation is below that of the US inflation. So every year, given that they have an inflation of about 4.5% and we are at maybe 2%, if nothing happens on a real effective exchange rate basis, we are gaining 2.5% of real effective exchange rate competitiveness vis-a-vis the US, just the US. So I think the exchange rate is very competitive. Where it will go obviously depends on many other things.
Mr. Sanyal, we're out of time, but it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for giving us your views and your thoughts on the Indian economy today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.